I'm Cole Haddon, and what you're about to listen to is a bonus episode from Season 1 of 5 a.m. Story Talk. In this podcast bonus eps, my guests break down a seminal piece of art from their lives, what I describe as mini masterclasses, although not always on the subject you expect. These bonus episodes are exclusive to my paid supporters in the season they were originally published. But in the following season, they're each unlocked, one at a time, so everyone can listen to them alongside the new episodes. Your paid subscriptions get you early access to these bonus eps, months and months early, but they also help keep the lights on here. In fact, Season 2 of this podcast enjoys several production upgrades because so many of you believe in this multimedia arts and culture conversation. I hope you consider becoming a paid supporter yourself, which you can learn more about in the show notes. Now, enjoy this 5 a.m. Story Talk bonus episode, Story Talkers. Welcome back to 5 a.m. Story Talk, my friends. Hopefully you were here for the first part of my conversation with Dr. Kevin Peter Hand, the director of the NASA JPL's Ocean Worlds Lab. Now that's a fancy way of saying he's a key scientist in our search for life in our solar system, trying to take us to icy worlds like Europa, Enceladus, and more. On top of that, he's a real-life adventurer from Antarctica to the North Pole, from Kilimanjaro to the bottom of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, 9 times, including to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth. In this second part of my conversation with him, which is exclusive to 5 a.m. Story Talk's paid subscribers, and thank you very much for being one of those, you have my eternal gratitude, my friends. Kevin and I will be digging into a seminal piece of art from his life, but also mine, as you'll hear. I'm talking about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was released in 1977 and written and directed by Steven Spielberg. We're going to try to unpack why the film was so emotionally important to both of us, leading Kevin in part to become a scientist and leading me to abandon gods in favor of science as a way to understand the universe. But the conversation is so much broader than that, revealing, I hope, a lot about how to emotionally communicate ideas that might be too big and complicated to explain in more literal ways. I think the juxtaposition we draw between Close Encounters and 2016's Arrival is also potentially very helpful. So there you go. Let's get back to my conversation with my old friend, Dr. Kevin Peter Hand. Welcome back, Kevin. I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. When I invited you to join me for the podcast, I asked you to pick a film or a TV series or any piece of art that you describe as a seminal piece of art in your life. And you picked Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was released in 1977. It's one of my favorite Spielberg films, so I was really excited by the pick. Can you tell me a bit about the film from your perspective, but also what it's meant to you and your life?
So a few different layers in there, but let me start with the obvious. It's a film about making contact with aliens, right? So there's that, and I think it's an amazing portrayal of making contact, and the music, and we can dive into the tones and a lot of the story there. But when you asked me that question and asked me for a recommendation, I kind of went through some of the obvious choices in terms of like artistically. I'd probably say my favorite is 2001, followed by 2010. Beautiful films, and they also involve Europa, the moon of Jupiter. That is the centerpiece of my research. Then, of course, there's also Carl Sagan's Contact, which is a book and then a movie that held up quite well, with Jodie Foster playing Ellie Arroway, and a really great presentation of what contact might look like. And then when I was a kid, even just thinking about Steven Spielberg movies, E.T. was incredibly impactful, and I cried. I still cry to E.T. But Close Encounters has got this interesting combination, I would say, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the sort of structure of the film. But Close Encounters turns out to be one of my most rewatched or rewatchable of grand sci-fi films. And I don't quite know why that is, but just even over this past Christmas holiday period, I watched it with my kind of preteen nieces and nibbling, and they found it thoroughly enjoyable, and it just kind of it uh it embraces science, it embraces wonder. It's got this chaotic family, it's got this these characters who are kind of going insane because of the fingerprint of this alien civilization, kind of calling upon their subconscious. So it's this pretty far, and I remember when I saw it when I was young, I remember the dead cow scene. I remember little Barry getting abducted, and the crazy lights in the house and the lights over the pickup truck. And then in college, I climbed Devil's Tower and was excited to get up there and just kind of experience Devil's Tower. And then as an older, middle career scientist, I just find myself coming back to Close Encounters once, if not twice a year. So yeah, there's a lot packed in there. What do you make of it as a film?
I love it. But I have an emotional relationship to it that probably muddies my ability to be too critical of it. I think it was the gateway drug for me giving up religion. I was raised Lutheran, and it suggested another way that even at that age was very jarring.
But go into that. Well, like, what's the how? Like, what?
The idea that you could look for answers through science. I mean, I'm sure you grew up. I don't remember if your parents were scientists.
I grew up Irish Catholic, and mom's a nurse, and dad worked at a ski area.
I grew up in a family that did not embrace education, anything like this. It wasn't some sort of far right anti-thought household, but you didn't think to look for answers through science. Mm-hmm. Science was something that smart people did, and so all of fantasy was built around, like, Indiana Jones. I mean, that's the fascinating thing, that Indiana Jones was a scientist who kept encountering the supernatural. That was drummed into me from an early age, that there were miracles everywhere. And my grandmother was convinced my grandfather became an angel, and just crazy stuff now. So the idea that there was a movie that said that you could have that numinous experience, that the search for the numinous could go through a route other than the divine. I saw it for the first time around 11 or 12. It was very shaking for me. I didn't see 2001 until later, though. I just made my 10-year-old at 9 years old at the time watch 2001, probably too early.
Right.
But he also watched Close Encounters in the same year and preferred Close Encounters. And I think it's an emotional experience. It promises space. It promises something. The glowing lights at the end, it feels heavenly. Everything about it felt like the freedom to imagine a world free of the supernatural, that you could find answers, that happiness could be acquired that way. It wasn't until years later I realized, the main character was abandoning his wife and kids, and probably would never see them again. These things seem startling in hindsight. But as a film, as a spiritual experience, I felt it worked on so many levels. Yes. I don't know if that's the right answer.
Absolutely. And that resonates with me. My parents were very supportive of education, but at the same time, I went to catechism and had to learn the Beatitudes and all that stuff. And I remember, probably somewhere in that 8 to 10 range, asking the priest, okay, so if all of this is true, where does God live? And just kind of these fundamental basic questions. And instead of having a compassionate answer, the priest scolded me and said, "You're not supposed to ask questions like that." At which point I was like, check, please.
Yes.
This,
I had similar. Dinosaurs were on the ark. You just
uh,
stop asking these questions. Of course they were on the ark. It's the one that didn't make it. Those are the ones that went extinct. Don't be an idiot.
yeah. And so, E.T. and Close Encounters came at the right time. As a kid, Close Encounters was definitely borderline scary. As were parts of E.T., but nothing compared to, a Werewolf in London or whatever that scary film was that I got exposed to at a young age. But the Close Encounters story, I don't know, like when I watch it these days, it's got a lot of humor to it. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's the father and him running away from his family, but that's actually kind of probably what would happen. I love the chaos of the family. I think it's a really interesting Spielberg film. And here again, you would know more than I do, but it was his next movie after Jaws, right? And so he goes from this amazing tale, petrifying tale of this shark to then this incredible combination of wonder and awe and science, but also a bit scary, a bit chaotic, and a lot of the elements that I think you see later on of comedy and action and science, whether it's in Indiana Jones or stuff that's more recent. It all kind of has a thread that can connect back to Close Encounters.
Close Encounters is interesting in Spielberg's oeuvre, and I don't know the man and I can't get into his head, but you look at the work and you have a film that is in many ways about the conflict between, under the surface, religion and science, or the search for the numinous. It has 10 commandments on television, like that's their relationship to God. A Jewish film, from the Old Testament, and he's a Jewish director, but at the time, from my understanding, less of a practicing Jewish person, all of these things. And looking to space. He ventures outward. And then you get to Indiana Jones, and suddenly it's a scientist who's trying to reject the supernatural, but keeps getting hit in the face with it. And then you get to Schindler's List, and he vocally discusses that he's embraced his Judaism in a way that he didn't see coming. And so the films in some way feel like a spiritual exploration of his conversion or reconversion to his ancestry, which is interesting. I might be reading too much into it, but it is a sort of 15-year process for him to get to these films. And he still does science fiction films, but I don't detect the same spiritual conflict in them that existed in those earlier films.
Yeah, Close Encounters definitely sets that up, that tension between science and religion and society, and there again, that's part of why I find Close Encounters fun to rewatch, and that tension holds up even tracing on into the modern, into recent years.
I have two questions I certainly want to get in. And one is, you cited these other films that were huge influences, and books also, Arthur C. Clarke and Carl Sagan. But 2001, the 2001 series, and Contact are both very much about scientists. Mm-hmm. And the film that you rewatch the most is about this sort of, the first contact, whatever it is, but it is just about an everyman. And I don't know if there's anything to read into that, but maybe there is.
It's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way. And I guess, yeah, now when I think of the fact that these characters who are kind of touched by the extraterrestrials with their obsession over Devil's Tower being the every woman, every man, maybe in some ways I sort of identified with that, as I did with Elliot in E.T. Uh, my home in Vermont, we had a little forest in the back, and I would dream of a spaceship landing in that little forest and making contact with ET. And yeah, that aspect of Close Encounters, I think, is also, I think, what makes it relatable and popular. Coupled with, just coming back to the art and the music theme. One of the things that in college, I studied physics and astronomy, but also psychology, and the ambiguity of contact in Close Encounters is one of the things that I love most. And what I mean by the ambiguity is the tones, is that dance towards the end, where to this day it still like gets me kind of welled up, where the board of lights and the organist are going nuts back and forth, going through all sorts of different tones. And I think Spielberg did an amazing job in storytelling by not telling too much of the story, because that's often where things get kind of that's a pitfall, right? If you try and explain too much, if you try and go through what did you say, the numinous, right? Do you think if Spielberg had more explanation, if it was more expository at the end, would that have served the film well, or would he have compromised that kind of numinous nature?
Well, I think this might come back to my question about art as a way to explain anything about the universe. But because here, trying to explain the difficulty, this was actually the other question I was going to bring up. The idea that these two species wouldn't be able to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
But mathematics is a universal language, and that's incredibly boring. I mean, how do you look? We're looking at math. It worked in Contact to a degree just because it ended up creating Stargate images, but it's very difficult to emotionally understand that when you're in the audience, and
Mm-hmm.
turning math into music, a very natural progression, creates an emotional experience. It creates a visual experience. It creates a cinematic experience. And so that, I think, is this genius that
Yeah.
more than probably anything else in the film, that is the most graceful thing that happens in it, is explaining math
Yeah.
with colorful lights
Right.
and five notes played over and over, and you understand it. And if you had stopped, that's the answer to your question. I think if they had stopped, had somebody standing at a board, writing
Mm-hmm.
these things out, explaining it in more than a few sentences, which is really all it takes once you have the visual imagery to express it, I don't think anybody would have cared. They're in the middle of
Well,
watching somebody try to communicate with God, and you're talking about math at that point. It's
yeah.
what and that's, even there is a part of my, I guess, ties back into the question about 2001 and Contact. Those feel like films that are very hard to understand as a 10-year-old, even
Yeah.
emotionally.
Yeah.
Contact more so, but there's still films that require a lot of exposition as you go through it. And
Mm-hmm.
2001 creatively dodges it, but you have to be able to explain complicated visual juxtapositions to grasp what is really happening. Whereas Close Encounters, it's just an emotional experience that a 10-year-old boy gets.
Yeah. And I think you really dissected that well, and I didn't really realize it until now, is that, yeah, the compelling aspect of Close Encounters for me, and obviously you, after what you just said, is that when I compare it to, say, 2001 or Contact or any number of other movies, Close Encounters wins out on the emotions that I feel when I watch it. 2001 is very powerful for me, but it is more cerebral, and intellectual. Contact is very intellectual, very science-based. I think it does a wonderful job with it. And in just sort of the compare and contrast within the Spielberg films, E.T. as a young child hit me emotionally, and I still enjoy watching it, but I'm not as emotionally tied to it as Close Encounters. And it's just something about the music and the visual of Devil's Tower and just all these various characters that kind of pop in, whether it's the government trying to hide this secret and the bond between the two main characters and their pursuit of trying to get to this area, and then the reveal with the TV and the suspense and knowing that eventually this guy is going to make the connection between his mashed potatoes and his shaving cream and his garbage can sculpture and the basaltic towers of Devil's Tower. The suspense and emotion and then connection with the alien spaceship. Yeah, it was phenomenally done.
When I showed my 9-year-old at the time Close Encounters, he loved the music, hummed it afterward, everything about meeting the aliens at the end. I hesitated for a moment at the quality of the aliens' effects, but then sort of sunk into it. Watched 2001 right up until the third act. Loved it till the music really settled in. 2 weeks afterward, he just walked around making that obnoxious sort of booming noise to let me know how frustrated he was, that it was still in his head. So that's that emotional disconnection. Though all that said, you said it's a cerebral film. And my son, as I mentioned earlier, a bit gifted. And I asked him, what do you think happened? He said, no, just take a guess, because it took me several viewings and then I had to read the book to really understand the depth of the character's transformation in the end. I feel like they put him, they turned him into, I don't know, his soul into a bunch of data. And I don't know, they put him into a computer. And I think at the end, I think that glowing baby was him. They just made him into something new, but they took everything, his soul, and made him into that. And I thought, are you little shit? Like, no. But that's the thing. It was too cerebral for him.
Right.
That was the disconnect. As a 9-year-old, he needed the emotional experience, and it was a lesson for me about why some films don't connect with children, no matter how magical they might seem, because you have large monoliths and early hominids, any of that. It's irrelevant if there's no emotional connection for your 9-year-old.
Well, so let me ask you just an interesting sort of compare and contrast, fast forwarding to a more recent film that I think was incredibly well done, and that is Arrival. Right,
Yes. Eric Heiser wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah, and aesthetically beautiful, sets a tone, it sets a story and a tension with this intelligent civilization. I was hooked just by the idea that these are some sort of octopi creature. I love the idea of intelligent octopi out there in our galaxy. And I love the film. It's interesting. My only criticism is that, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, is that at the end of the day, it's a love story, right? And it's a love story about learning this language of time and the way in which these alien octopi communicate, and that allows the main characters to, from a storytelling standpoint, we jump around and there's cancer and death and rebirth and in the end it's a love story. And so my only criticism is that the science fiction, the amazing science fiction, is really just a mechanism to tell this tragic love story, right? Which is great, makes for a great movie. But Close Encounters of the Third Kind sort of has this purity to contact and just, okay, this is all about these people going crazy because somehow they have been imbued with a calling from this extraterrestrial civilization. And the movie ends with them just getting scooped up and off they go. And everything else is a question mark. There's no pretense to it being a front for a love story or some other kind of standard story. What's your take on my take?
I love the love story of Arrival. I think it's a film that layers commentary about communication globally and within a relationship. I think quite elegantly. I think it's a film that balances the cerebral and the emotional
Yeah.
pretty damn well. But compared to Close Encounters as a film certainly to inspire a 10-year-old, the emotional through line is very clear. It's emotionally aspirational in terms of how you want to see the world or what you want out of the world. You've done all of these adventurous things. The character of Roy in Close Encounters, that character is both aspirational for a 10-year-old who wants to go and have adventures. The idea of going out into space, Luke Skywalker, it promises something, but it's also the story of a man in his 30s who is lacking something spiritually. So it's a story that very much speaks to adults as well. And that sense that I missed out on something. I have everything I'm supposed to have, but I'm empty inside, that there's something more. And so I think it's a film that is easier to access. It's easier to access as a 10-year-old, and it's easier to access as a 50-year-old today. I'm not sure if that's specifically what you were asking.
Well, yeah, and I agree with everything that you said about Arrival, a beautiful love story, but in some ways, and this is probably good for the movie Arrival, it could almost be classified more as a drama than as a sci-fi, right? Because it is such a well-told love story, and the writing and the acting is so brilliant. And
Yes.
so I almost see it as a drama with a sci-fi mechanism to tell that love story, which is great. But then Close Encounters is kind of, I would say, more of a pure, the emotions that I feel. Okay, this is good. We're working through our dissection of this. Yeah, the emotions that I feel when watching Arrival have to do with the love story, right? Whereas the emotions that I feel when watching Close Encounters are directly precipitated from the wonder and awe of what's out there and the music and the spaceships, et cetera, et cetera. So coming back to that theme of the power of the emotions and that storytelling, yeah, the emotions from Arrival are one that are powerful from a love story standpoint, whereas Close Encounters is wonder and awe.
There's a dissonance to that. I think that Arrival, its twist is that the entire story is incredibly small and intimate. It has larger implications, but it is a very small personal story. And we don't typically get given a film that costs, over, I think that one was over 100 million, but it costs a lot. We don't typically get to see a film of that scale, to see something that small on an emotional level, where Close Encounters, the payoff is to literally get bigger and bigger and bigger. And even if you watch some of the other cuts, even once you get inside the spaceship, the scope is beyond anything that the human brain can comprehend. And so it's awe, that you're building to a state of awe. And the other is, it contracts in some way, which I've never articulated all this before, but it's a fascinating parallel. I might have to write about that.
Well, and in Arrival, I remember, and this came with like the second or third or 10th viewing, because on first viewing I was so enveloped in the story that it didn't really register. But yeah, there's a couple of throwaway lines in there about the aliens communicate. We were here 5,000 years ago, and I remember being like, "Wait a minute, tell me more about that." But that, of course, was not the point of the story, right?
Mhm.
The point of the story was the love story. But from a sci-fi
Yep.
standpoint, I wanted to know about that prior visit.
Well, we
Uh,
should wrap this up. I have one more question I want to ask, and it alludes to something we discussed in the first part of the conversation, which is just that I don't even remember which question we were discussing at the time. But you saw this film when you were a child. It inspired you with certain fantasies about science fiction, but now you're an adult and you've lived as a scientist. And these are what inspired you as a child versus today.
mhm.
Can you talk about the difference between what you thought you were going to be as a scientist, what being a scientist meant versus your present after going from the boy who saw Close Encounters to the man who's trying to take us to Europa?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing to say is that I thought we'd be a lot further along by now. So the if you had asked the 10-year-old version of me, or even the 15 or 20-year-old version of me, what would have occurred, what we'd be doing in the year 2025, I would probably have given you a list of discoveries and exploration achievements that far exceed what we have done. But I think that's par for the course. Every generation has that problem of kind of having a vision for more, and then as you get older and see how things get done, you realize that they take much longer. I think in terms of the actual manifestation of what it means to be a scientist, I honestly did not really have a clue as a kid. All I knew of what it meant to be a scientist was from reading books, and watching Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and like you said, watching Indiana Jones, right? That was my first exposure to, okay, wait a minute, this guy teaches at a university and then goes off and tries to collect artifacts. But even that didn't really register. And I didn't even know that you had to get a PhD to be a scientist until I was halfway through college. I was just not, in some ways, I was raised beautifully naive of academia, and in other ways, when I look back, it's so I could have benefited from a little college guidance and things like that. But I've been incredibly fortunate to have the career that I've had and to do the things that I've done. And I think the younger me would have expected me to be out at Jupiter by now, but short of that, exploring the ocean and the Arctic and doing what I can to help advance the exploration of our solar system, I think the younger me would be pretty happy.
As the Stone song goes, you can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. And it sounds like it's been a pretty damn amazing life, despite the stresses that I'm sure come with it all.
Oh, thanks, Cole. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Kevin. It's really been a blast. I've enjoyed laughing so much through a science education.
Likewise, my pleasure. A lot of fun to cover a lot of terrain with you.
Yes, yes. All right. Hopefully it's not as long between conversations next time.
Yeah, let's make sure of that. Cheers.
As for the rest of you, thank you again so very much for your support of 5 a.m. Story Talk. If you have any questions about this bonus episode, be sure to jump into the comments and let me know how I can help. Until the next episode, be well, my friends. If you need a pick-me-up, head outside on the next clear night. Bundle up if you have to, and just lay down under the stars. I mean, unless you're me, because there are a lot of big fucking kangaroo that like to hang out in my backyard after dark. But you should definitely take the time to do that yourself. Look up, enjoy the vastness, and how amazing it is that we get to ride around the sun on this beautiful blue planet.